Yes, Thanksgiving Day, we had 16 people over for our family dinner, and I was in charge of the turkey as well as some other things. And I had recently purchased some really cool digital Thermomaven G2 thermometers, so I was super excited to use them. And about 2 hours into the cook process of a 23.5-pound turkey, I realized that the ambient temperature sensors on those thermometers were registering like 197 degrees when the oven said it was 325. So the main symptom here is that the oven would come up to temperature properly, but it would not maintain the temperature. So I did some research to figure out what types of things might actually cause issues with maintaining the temperature. And the two items that were recommended were to check the thermosensors that are inside the oven cavity itself, and also to check the baking element. I will say that the turkey itself, about 3/4 of the turkey came out perfectly fine. Everybody raved about how delicious and juicy the turkey was and flavorful, so that was great. The other stuff that we cut off that wasn't completely cooked, just simply threw that in the air fryer for about 5-6 minutes, and that was ready to serve as well. So in the end, everything worked out just fine. But of all the days in the world for your oven to die, Thanksgiving is absolutely a nightmare. So in part one of this particular nightmare, I showed you how to replace the thermosensors in the oven. In this video, I'm going to walk through how to replace the hidden bake element that's located in the bottom of the oven cavity. And this actually ended up being the actual cause of my turkey cook issues on Thanksgiving Day. So let's check it out. To begin, pull your range away from the wall and carefully unplug the plug from the outlet. Next, we need to identify all of the screws on the back of the range that will allow us to remove the sheet metal panel. Be sure to keep track of all of your screws so you have them available to reinstall the panel later. Once all of the screws have been removed, carefully lift up the panel from the bottom, upwards, and slide the panel out of the top grooves. The first thing we need to do is locate and identify the bottom base panel of our range as shown here. On my range, you'll notice 2 Phillips screws at the back of this panel. Using a Phillips screwdriver, carefully remove the 2 screws and be sure not to lose them. Next, we'll use a flathead screwdriver to gently pry or lift up the bottom base panel. Finally, remove the panel from the oven cavity and set it aside. I noticed quite a bit of debris, so I used my shop vac to clean it up quickly. Next, you'll want to identify the 2 wires connected to the baking element terminals. In my oven, this is the red and yellow wires shown here. These connectors slide off pretty easily, but you can also gently remove using a pair of pliers. You'll also want to tuck these wires somewhere so they are out of the way. Next, we need to remove the terminal block. There are a few different ways to remove this. In my case, I wanted the simplest way to just move the entire assembly versus unscrewing every wire. You'll notice there are 2 Phillips screws securing the terminal block to the sheet metal. Simply remove these 2 screws and set them aside. Next, locate and identify this small metal tab and carefully bend it downward with a pair of pliers. Gently pull the terminal block panel away from the range by sliding it off of that tab. Then, very carefully feed the power cable up through the hole and pay close attention to not scraping the sheath of the cable on the edge of the cutout hole in the sheet metal. The goal here is to position this out of the way so that you can slide out the baking element. Just to the left of the power cable, you should see this black wire and connector. Squeeze the tab on the connector and pull to disconnect it. Next, we need to use a utility knife to cut a gap into the insulation that surrounds the bake element. While doing this, be extremely careful not to accidentally cut the main power cable. Before we can slide the element out, we need to remove 2 more Phillips screws. These screws are located under each of the element's terminals and are what hold the element in place. Post-edit Brian here. Just a word to the wise. When you're dealing with insulation, which we are in this particular video, you want to make sure that you're wearing some type of hand protection, such as gloves. I did not do this in the video, and I will tell you, hours after the video was finished, I was itching my arms, my hands all over the place, and it was just crazy. So make sure you're wearing hand protection to avoid getting all of the small particles of the fiberglass insulation in your skin. Back to the video. Next, gently lift up on the terminals on both sides and begin to slowly slide the element toward you. One thing to note, the insulation has very fine particles of glass in it and will create a mess and likely irritate your skin. In hindsight, I recommend wearing gloves for this project. While sliding the element out, if you sense resistance, it is likely that you need to make more of a cut into the insulation to accommodate the size of the element's coils. This is a shot of the element sliding out from inside the oven, and while doing this, I cut into the insulation more as I was sliding it out. Coming to the back of the range, here is an example of the mess the insulation can create. The goal here is to remove this element from the range so that we can install the replacement. Before installing the new element, take a moment to examine it for any cracks or defects. Following the same process in reverse, slide the new element into the insulation-filled slot and slowly push through the insulation. Pay attention to any wires and make sure to clear them out of the way as needed. Here is a view of the element coming back into the oven. In my case, I needed to do a little more maneuvering of the element from both the back and front sides of the oven. The goal is to get the new element to sit securely under these tabs on both sides. Next, I did some cleanup to remove all of the insulation debris that pushed into the oven cavity. I then neatened up the insulation on the oven side of things to ensure there weren't too many open spots. Next, I reinstalled the 2 Phillips screws that hold the element in place. I then used some of the insulation that fell out during removal and just packed it in around the terminal area. Next, I reconnected the black cable. I then reconnected the red wire to its terminal and the yellow wire to its terminal on the baking element. Next, very carefully pull the main electrical cable through the cutout hole to get the terminal block back where it needs to be. Be careful not to scrape the sheath of the cable on the sharp edge of the sheet metal. Carefully slide the mounting plate back onto that small tab, and then carefully bend the tab back up and into place. Next, reinstall the 2 Phillips screws that hold the terminal block to the range. Before we reinstall the rear panel, it's wise to test out the new element to ensure it is working properly. Plug the range back into the wall outlet. For my test, I set the bake temperature to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the oven had reached the proper temperature, I checked the accuracy of the temperature with my in-oven thermometer. As we can see, the temperature is pretty close to 300 degrees. Next, after leaving the oven for about 20 minutes and increasing the temperature to 325 degrees, I came back and tested increasing the temperature. Previously, my oven would start losing heat once the set temperature was achieved. The cause of this was that the bottom bake element wasn't kicking in to maintain the heat. As we can see, increasing the temperature to 350 degrees, preheating starts around the current temperature. Previously, this would have displayed about 100 degrees less than the set temperature. Again, after about 15 minutes, I checked the accuracy of the temperature using the in-oven thermometer. After allowing the oven to completely cool down, I put the bottom base panel back in place. I then secured the panel with the 2 Phillips screws removed earlier. Next, I put the rear panel cover back in the slots and dropped it down into place. Finally, I reinstalled all of the Phillips screws to secure the rear panel to the range.